Hey, it's Renee from the Craft Table. It is week 2 of our summer embroidery stitch along. I am coming to you, not really live, but I'm coming to you from a green space in Park City, Utah. I apologize that the setting is probably not the best, the lighting is probably not the best. There's going to be a car that's going to pass by right now. I can hear it. Maybe that's just on the highway. Long story, but we're having issues again with our RV. So this is the only place that I have to record at the moment. Luckily, the close-ups of the actual stitching I've already done, so that'll be a little bit better than this. But just want to say hi. Week 2, this is the week we start stitching. We're doing the back stitch this week. I have a link to a really short, quick tutorial on how to do the back stitch if you want to just jump directly there. That will be linked in the description below this video. Yeah, again, sorry, all kinds of background noise, and I'm filming this on my iPhone. But I do need to point out a couple of things. There were a few questions about the fabric. If you bought the PDF and you're tracing your design onto another piece of fabric, if you need a more in-depth video tutorial on how to do that, let me know and I can do that. I know I just walked through the steps really briefly, but I can do a whole video on how to actually trace it using a light box, or how to do your printer settings if you're doing the sulky dissolvable paper. One thing I did not mention in the last video, which I should have, several people ask, and it's a very good question. So if you ordered the pre-printed panel from me, either as the pattern that came with the pre-printed panel or the kit, the design that's on the fabric is permanent. So you're basically going to cover it with stitches. It will not iron out, it will not wash out. But the way the instructions are written and the way we're going to be stitching, all the lines will be covered up once we get to the end of the stitch along. So you don't need to worry about the lines, but I'm sorry I didn't mention that before. It was professionally printed on a digital printer. I didn't print them, but the lines are permanent on there. So, and I tried to change the grayscale when I was printing it so the lines wouldn't be super dark, but dark enough that you can see them when you're doing the embroidery. I was gonna say raise your hand if you're new here, but basically if you have done my stitch alongs in the past, you'll know in the past we took an existing fabric design that was commercially printed and we just embellished it. There was no pattern, there was no set steps. This time around, it's a design made specifically for the stitch along, and there is a pattern that goes with it. Because I wanted it at the end of the stitch along, I wanted it to be a standalone pattern. So if you're participating in the stitch along, you don't have to really worry about those instructions because we'll be going over them each week. And also in the past, we kind of started with the basic embroidery stitches and then progressed to the more complicated stitches as the weeks went on. But this time around, the order of stitching is mainly based on the way the design is and what's easier to stitch first versus what's easier to stitch later. So if you have any questions about what's coming up, or what we're going to be stitching, feel free to reach out. And if you want to jump ahead and just follow the pattern, you can do that as well. But again, the pattern you don't really need for the stitch along, but since I developed this design, it's new and it's specifically for the stitch along, but then someone hopefully would want to purchase it even after the stitch along. I just went ahead and wrote up an entire pattern. So just wanted to explain that. So in a minute, I'm going to demonstrate how to actually stitch the back stitch. And then I will show you all the different places where the back stitch is to be stitched on this particular panel. The other housekeeping note that I want to mention, I like to stitch with Eleganza pearl cotton. And that is not like embroidery floss from the point of view of embroidery floss has 6 strands. So you typically unwind like 12 to 18 inches of your floss, cut it, and then decide how many strands of floss that you want to stitch. If you're using embroidery floss that comes in 6 strands, I would recommend using 3 strands for this design. You could probably get away with more in most of the areas, but when we get to the raised chain stitch, for example, the lines are spaced pretty close together, and I think you might have a little bit of difficulty if you're using a thicker weight thread or more than 3 strands. Okay, so let's get to stitching the back stitch. Bring your needle up from the back of your fabric 1 stitch length ahead of where you want your stitch to begin. Then you're going to take your needle back a stitch length away and pull it through to the back again of your fabric. That is your first stitch. For your next stitch, you're going to come up a stitch length away, pulling your needle to the front, and then when you take your needle down, you want to go into the previous, where the previous stitch ended, right in that same hole. And you're going to continue doing that all along where you want your back stitch to go. Going forward 1 stitch length, coming up, and then taking your needle back down to the previous stitch. Kind of why it's called the back stitch. But anyway, you're just going to again continue all the way around, and this area right here where I have a curve, you see what I'm doing with my needle? Sometimes you can use your needle to adjust a curved area, or if the thread's not laying exactly where you want it to be. And again, this little part of the urn, there's some pretty tight curves, and when I'm doing this particular area, I try not to pull my thread super tight. And then I use my needle just to sort of adjust that thread so it curves where you want it to curve, and you're not having sharp points in that particular area of the design. So I am approaching where I began my stitching. And so you'll just see as I make that last stitch that I'm connecting where my back stitch began to where the last stitch is. And that will complete the outside of the urn. Then what we're going to do is embroider the inside part of the urn, other than where the lazy daisy stitch goes. So here's a look at the panel and all the different places that you'll be stitching the back stitch. Everywhere that I've stitched on here is where you will stitch the back stitch, and those are the only places. You can also reference the pattern that came along with your panel if this is what you're stitching. And it may look kind of weird now because there's going to be additional stitches in certain areas, and the urn, for instance, looks kind of weird because the lazy daisy stitch has not been stitched yet, so on the inside of the urn. So just keep that in mind. We're doing it by stitch, type of stitch, rather than a certain area of the pattern. So again, we'll be going back and filling in the satin stitch, for instance, inside that yellow area. We're going to be doing some lazy daisy stitches. We got some pistol stitch going on there, but it's all going to come together at the end. So when you're finished with all the back stitching for week 2, this is how much will be stitched on your fabric panel. So I will see you next week for the stem stitch, and in the meantime, happy stitching.